Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining and for having such a full room, given that we've had 2 days of no sunlight. This is your friendly reminder to drink some water, as I'm sure you've been drinking a lot of other stuff or not enough. And for everyone who is in the chat or watching virtually, also thank you for sticking along throughout the whole day. As Lillian had mentioned, I love this conference because it is my excuse to take this personal passion, this personal research of mine, and have to elevate it to the level to be presented in front of all of you. So every time I get this talk accepted, I go, oh my God, okay, it's time to really make this happen. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. The talk is called Sharing Compared, and it's a study on the changing landscape of CTI networking. And we'll talk about what that means as well. So if you have no familiarity, that is completely okay. The button works, great. A little bit about me first. My name is Grace Chi. During the day, I'm the co-founder and the COO of PulseDive. We're focused on frictionless threat intelligence solutions for growing teams. We are our vendor SaaS, but I really like taking my unique position and kind of putting on my liberal arts poster child behavioral neuroscience hat to say, like, look at you guys, like, let me observe what's happening in the market and what the behaviors of individuals are, and maybe areas that are a little bit underserved or under-researched. Additionally, if you know me at all, you'll know that I really enjoy illustration, particularly watercolor and ink. And I really love different types of tabletop exercises like games and board games, especially the more stressful, the more cooperative, the more fun. And so if you do recognize this last bubble here, I want you to hit me up on the Slack or to find me and connect with me later, because we'll have a lot to talk about. So what is CTI networking? I promise I'm not trying to make a new magic quadrant. I'm not trying to create a new Forrester wave, teasing some of you. This is just the easiest way that I could combine like all of the interaction of individuals for the purpose of improved CTI outcomes. So it's really related to that business work. So there's a lot of stigma and a lot of like fear of that transactional networking, and that's not what we're talking about. This is also not like networking in the sense of I want a job promotion, I want to land a new customer. This is really completely just human to human connection for the purpose of being better and improving the CTI program. And my philosophy and my hypothesis 2 years ago was that it's really treated, this connection, this sharing, this CTI networking, as I bundled it all together, it's an afterthought in practice. It's overlooked, it's undervalued, it's kind of nebulous, in spite of its demonstrated impact as a vital asset. As we mentioned, sharing was talked about so much, but we don't really understand it. So like those who are in the know, who work in the space, kind of get it, and it stops there. And so what I did 2 years ago, and you can still see this online, it's bit.ly/CTI-networking-2022. That was the inaugural benchmark where I just threw questions out there to our industry to say, what are your practices? What results have you gotten? What are your beliefs around CTI networking? And then really looked around like, what are the methods? What are the reasons? And what are the roles that your organization plays or really doesn't play, as we learned? And then 2 years later, use your best SpongeBob voice, I updated it. For the most part, I kept most of the questions the same, so we have this quasi-longitudinal study. And I really wanted to revisit what's changed and what hasn't, right? So what are our perceptions of value? Where have we changed, where we're spending our time and what we're getting out of these efforts? And then also push a little bit further to say, now we have qualitative and quantitative data over 2 years or two time points. So what are some actual maps to best practices to network more effectively, more inclusively, more strategically for our organizations and for our roles? And so today we're going to cover just a couple of the key findings. The full report has been published live. It's bit.ly, I'll go back to show you, bit.ly/CTI-networking-2024. And I will share these slides with you as well after. And so we're going to talk about why individuals network. It's really about making an honest effort to get ahead, where they do it, really unlocking one-to-one messages and peer-to-peer trust groups, what's happening structurally around it. So gains in visibility, but also a lot of restrictions that we're finding, sometimes related to regulatory changes in our space. And then what's next? What's a roadmap for success? What's something that everyone here can be inspired by and take away? Because it's quite simple in many regards, but it is not easy to execute on over time. So let's get started with how and why individuals are networking. Really here, it's making an honest effort to get ahead. And so don't worry if you can't read this. This is really so after the fact you can see all of the data. The area that had the largest consensus 2 years ago was that CTI networking is important for CTI team members at all levels. That was at, I think, like 92% and actually went up 1% over the last 2 years. And so what we found here is actually a lot of the beliefs that we held 2 years ago really held steadfast, and even some of it went even more in a positive way. And we also found that CTI practitioners also wanted to continue connecting with other people with similar threat landscapes or in the same industry, that they want to know who they're networking with because trust takes time. And also a lot of people still agreed that this kind of networking is really essential for performing job responsibilities. And so this consensus really held strong, and the desire for more also held strong. Now, this is a little bit of an interactive session, so I'll take comments out loud from the room, or you could throw it in the Slack as well. I had a question to everyone who responded saying, what provides you the most value? I forced everybody to rank these items from 1 to 6. And so I would love to hear from this room as well as from the Slack, what did people rank top overall on average? And also, what did people rank number 1 the most? Because surprisingly, the answers for these 2 questions are different. So let's start, just anyone in the room who feels like, speaking up out of others' advice and opinions, raw data, processed intelligence, contextualized information, emotional support, and technical support. What do you think? Yes.
We built a survey. So
amazing.
If everyone goes into Slack, you can respond to the survey.
Okay, yeah. Beautiful.
Summit discussion group.
In the Summit discussion channel, if you are able to send in the poll, then we'll actually get more surveys on top of the survey.
18 so far, 19.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I'll note a couple things. And I'm sorry, Joe, please forgive me. I know you talked about the ontology of IOCs and ontology of what raw data is. This is based on the current set of flawed bucketing of what raw data information and intel is, not necessarily what it should be. So we'll do a quick check-in.
So contextualized information is number 1 by a long shot. Emotional support, which I selected as well, that's at 19, and then process intelligence is number 12. Okay,
so just to repeat what Rick had mentioned, contextualized information wins by a long shot as number 1. Emotional support is also in the lead, and then process intelligence last. So funny enough, you guys are more on the 2022 side versus the 2024 side. 2 years ago, contextualized information took first place, followed by intelligence, followed by raw data. So lots of give me the stuff, give me the good stuff. This year, we actually found that raw data took top billing and it jumped up 2 spots. And then it was followed by, obviously, the good stuff, information and intelligence. So there's really kind of this, whatever it is, it's that content that can be consumed, but raw data seems to be more top of mind and more valuable. Now, the ranking of the bottom 3 were more or less similar. However, Rick, you were very prescient. Surprisingly, and this was something that kind of caught me off guard, there were the most votes for emotional support in number 1 place, more than any of the other categories. However, it also had a lot of last place votes. And I think what this shows is that there's a lot of teams that need that solidarity, that need that kind of outside perspective when they might not have it in-house. And so when I did my first research, some people were like, do you really need emotional? Is it really something you should include on the survey? And it really is something that comes and is highly valued within these networks. When we look more at just general benefits, we find that what's, the top 4 stayed the same with, some changes in ranking. And there were a couple other things that were at the bottom 4 that also stayed in the same exact order. And what we find here is that it's all about staying aware of what's happening strategically. Sometimes a little bit of like shiny new object syndrome, new methods, new things, threat data that's active, taking proactive measures, or speaking to Andy's talk, maybe it's a little bit less like super reactive and just a little bit reactive. So we're not completely negligent in what's happened. But the great thing that we found is that across all 8 of these rankings, the percentage of respondents who said that they were able to get these benefits was about 8% higher on average. So even though the rankings more or less haven't changed all too much, people are continuing to find not just the same amount of benefits, but even more. And you'll see there are some quotes that are on the slides, and there's a lot more in the report. This really gives you some qualitative insights that I collected as well to add color and add specifics and add examples to these findings. And these are from real practitioners who sent in the survey, and I really appreciate everyone who sent in a survey as well. Next, when we look at where and like what channels CTI networking happens, I kind of give you the answer right now. It's really all about unlocking one-to-one direct messages. You and me were talking because I know that this is going to impact you, or peer-to-peer trust groups where you're in these kind of hard to access but highly trusted groups for the most part. And so we already know what the answers are, but I believe there's another poll. Is that right? Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of options, and if not, we can just go back to the local. So I got together a bunch of different methods that include volunteer groups and coalitions, peer-to-peer trust groups, dark web, social media and public forums, industry events, paid membership groups, one-to-one direct messages, and community platforms. Community platforms was newly added. So I guess in the room, if the poll isn't ready, what are some of the ways that you participate in CTI networking? Anybody? Otherwise, I'm going to start calling on people. There should be one that everyone in this room is in it. The summit, so an event, that's right, Slack, so that might be messages or groups. I know there were a few speakers here who are part of the ISAC, so that would be a paid membership group. And so there's lots and lots of different ways to get involved and to find people who may be in your shared landscape. Now, is there?
They're building out.
Okay, they're building it.
Right
Okay.
now, it looks like industry events and peer-to-peer trust groups are kind of going back and forth for the lead. And
Oh, that's fun.
volunteer groups and coalitions is the next. Oh, no, sorry, social media and public forums.
Okay. So what we heard is, if I'm getting that right, industry events, volunteer groups are kind of competing for the lead, but also a lot of social media and also public forums. Okay, that makes sense. And so what we found 2 years ago was that peer-to-peer trust groups, social media, and one-to-one DMs were all pretty much tied for first place at 83 and 84% level of participation. This year, what we found is that actually pulled way ahead. So that really ran away with the rankings, and not just in the amount of participation, but in the benefits and the value that was provided. And so what we learned 2 years ago is that it's really these channels that are based on your personal reputation, your effort, that's kind of outside of organizational structure, that's really invite only and really built on trust, that we're providing a lot of value that we spent time in. Community platforms, which was newly added, ended up about in the middle across the board. And funny enough, one of my personal hypotheses going into this was, what the heck's going to happen to social media? Because there's been a lot of drama recently, and some of our favorite channels are not really our favorite channels at all. And we've signed up for a Clubhouse and a Blue Sky and a Mastodon, and I don't even know what else is out there. And so accordingly, and I believe related to these changes outside of just the industry of CTI, social media did drop in usage. And while social media dropped from 84% to 69%, industry events came up from 63 to 69%. And so that now they're competing in a third place tie. And why that was happening is, guess what? Like, we're all in person. When I presented last time, we were not in person. And in the open-ended responses, there was a lot of commentary about, like, I'd like more budget to go to events. I really want to go to events. Some of the best stuff that happens is on the sidelines, or like #hallwaycon of events. And so that is really important. But just participating doesn't mean that it might be good. So I asked 2 different types. First was asking about different perceptions of quality. Like, is it good to do these things, more or less? And so I asked, does doing this channel, does having this method, is it valuable to you? Is it high confidence? Is it timely? Is it actionable? Is it unique? And so there's a lot of different types of kind of methods that showed up in like second and third place. But if you squint your eyes and just look at the colors, it's one-to-one DMs and peer-to-peer trust groups that were perceived as very high quality. And so really these channels have a mix of quality, and that's why we kind of participate in a bunch of different things, because guess what? Social media is still the timeliest. That's when something breaks, that's where we're all looking, and that's what we're all reposting from. But we might be able to get high confidence data from paid trust groups if we have the privilege and the honor of being a member of an ISAC. But asking about quality is not the same as actual results, right? I trust in everyone's intuition, but it could also be quite biased. So then I asked it in a different way. And I said, based on these methods, what actually helped detect or prevent an attack? That's the first one. What provided value during an attack? What about after, during remediation or post-incident analysis? And then also kind of a catch-all here, what just shared some resources for a problem that I could not solve alone? And so what we find, is anyone surprised at this point? One-to-one DMs and peer-to-peer trust groups took first and second place across these questions. But surprisingly, and not surprisingly, because this happened 2 years ago, social media, when it came to active attacks, active threats, social media still ended up in third place. And so I think Rick was the one who mentioned it 2 years ago, is like, social media is noisy and it can be toxic, and maybe you can win $1 billion in Dogecoin if if you click the right links. And it's really about curating and potentially automating, as Brett might have mentioned, automating those collections and tuning it so it's actually the information and the researchers that you want to hear from versus the wide world of what is on different social media channels. And another key piece here that I heard in the open-ended responses as like frustration is like, peer-to-peer trust groups are great, one-to-one is great, but like, how do I access? It was really frustrating. How do I get there? All the people in the know get invited, but these are vetted in private trust groups. We have no idea how many there are out there. Several are TLP red, they might have 10 people in it. And so what we look at is that all of these other methods help feed, like you come into SANS and you build trust. And that gives you the ability to then evolve it into these more high value, high confidence, good result, meaningful impact to your CTI program types of methods. Moving into opportunities, we don't like to say problems, right? Opportunities in practice and issues, structures around this. We find some gains in visibility as well as some restrictions. Overall, when it comes to the structure around how we as professionals are networking, what we found is that the amount of time stayed almost exactly the same 2 years ago to today, where the vast majority, about half of all the respondents, spent 1 to 5 hours a week in networking. And then the next biggest chunk was about 20% that spent 5 to 10 hours. And so what we learned is that in spite of any challenges that we see, in spite of the benefits, we're stretched thin. This is what we learned through the qualitative responses. We're the analyst and the engineer, and we're thrunting, and we're doing IR, and we're supporting this, and we're also reporting to the CISO, right? There's a lot of stuff happening that's preventing us from doing it a little bit more or doing it more effectively. And then when we look at do you have formalized ways to collect what you are getting through CTI networking? We find that most of it is pretty informal. So it's just under 40%. It's like pretty informal. There's some rough guidelines. And then, yeah, about 28-ish%, just under 30% there's processes in place. And then finally, a smaller percent, just under 20, say, yes, highly standardized with best practices. To nobody's surprise, CTI professionals, that subsegment of CTI professionals with more than 10 years of experience, 72% of them have standards. And they have the benefit of typically being in larger organizations that can support that, as well as the expertise to manage that. And the takeaway here is really like, this is not meant to be another framework or something else you need to do, but building in some standardization, building in some measurements and metrics based on what you already have in place can help, just even getting attribution out there. I talked to some folks over the last few days that say, yeah, they actually will note that they got this information from a certain group. They tout that internally, and that gives you a lot of leeway to get more buy-in, which is a big issue. And so speaking of issues or opportunities, I guess another poll that may be built out over time. Oh, great, thank you. And so we asked, what are the challenges that impact your CTI networking? Now, there's a lot more than this, and there were a lot of options, but we have lack of buy-in, no budget, legal liability and confidentiality issues, competitive advantage issues, especially in the for-profit space and the commercial space, lack of in-house skills, noisiness, sharing restrictions, so something's TLP red, or you just simply, I'm not allowed to share that because it's classified. No time, lack of trust, right? Not knowing who they are, not knowing what the recipients of this data may be doing with the information you share, and then retaliation. And so I'll give a few seconds for the data to start populating, but please do jump into the channel to cast your vote in, sorry, what was the channel again? Summit discussion. And if there's any challenges you think that I'm missing that should be on here, I would also be curious. Okay, how are the votes coming in?
Got 66. Number 1 is legal liability, confidentiality. Number 2, sharing restrictions. Number 3, no time.
Okay, so legal liability, sharing restrictions, and no time. Now I think some of you may have opened up the report and you got the cheat guide. But yeah, 100%, those are exactly the top 3 challenges we faced. Now, if you look, there were 10 that I presented, and there are 5 on the screen. And interestingly enough, the other 5 were in the exact same order. And so what we found is that last year, no time was, or 2 years ago, no time was the biggest issue, followed by noisiness of data. This year, we find that it's legal liability and sharing restrictions. So it's kind of like this whole like, I want to, I'm not allowed to, sorry. You know, mom and dad said I can't. Legal team said I can't. And as we have more regulation, more government engagement, it's great because we're both encouraged to share more, but also liable to do it in a specific way. And so here with these challenges too, as much as, you know, some of us may feel a little bit allergic to policy or allergic to like controls, it's coming down the line, and you really want to be able to be in a meaningful dialogue here, because the worst thing that happens is, oh, we have to share now because of framework XYZ. Oh, being aware of the threat landscape is important because of this thing that came down. And so now they're telling us we have to share, and all I do is I upload one IOC to CISA or something, and that's it, right? We don't want meaningless kind of controls in place. So really finding a way to have the company, your organization, understand that risk, be able to manage it, build the right structures in place, build the right sharing partnerships or contracts in place, be in the right membership groups is really key here. And so just a couple of the notes is, you know, my obstacles include TLP and sensitivity restrictions, internal sharing policy, NDAs and TLP, laws, legal prosecutions, restrictions due to TLP level. It goes on. And then, you know, one person mentioned it in just a really obvious but way that I think we all feel, like identifying boundaries for relationships are really tough, and nothing exists, and you don't want to break rules, so then you feel like your hands are tied in many ways. And so this is really top of mind, and I do predict that this will continue to be extremely top of mind moving forward. When we look at organizational culture, here was the biggest win across the entire survey. Leadership was much more visible of the extent of the respondents' extent of CTI networking. It jumped up 18%. So it went from about 50 to, you know, 68-ish or so percent. And so there is more like awareness by the organization and by managers that this is happening. On the flip side, which is interesting, is that CTI networking is a little bit more defined. Doing this networking is defined. It is something that happens. We acknowledge it, yet it was less defined as part of so the respondents' time and responsibilities. And so this is that theme that we see where we're stretched thin, we're having a little bit of a moment of figuring out where CTI fits. And so you're responsible for a lot. So, hey, organization, this is something that happens, but you've got too much other stuff to do and figure out. Yet, as we saw before, it's still really important and people are still dedicating time. So organizationally, it's still kind of like, okay, you're on your own to like figure this out. You kind of are doing it in your spare time versus sanctioned company time. So let's take all of this together and then say we have, you know, 2 timestamps of data. We have plenty of information about where people are doing things and what the most senior folks are doing, what's valuable. So how do we move ahead? How does the person who may have joined the new to CTI summit and said, I'm still learning, it's 1 year, I just learned what threat intel is, to somebody who might be responsible for managing a team or works adjacent to a team, to be intentional, right? To be strategic around this and support CTI networking in meaningful ways. And so here's a roadmap. One of my peer reviewers, John, called this an onion. So I guess related to Gert-Jan's talk, maybe everyone has their own onion of a roadmap. I think it looks more like a really toxic shallot. I think someone else called it like a lantern, which I accept too. So in this roadmap, it's you start, right? So you broaden and build out. Everyone has to start somewhere. It doesn't have to be really intimidating. Then you evaluate, you start to get stretched thin. So you want to narrow and focus on what gives you outsized value. And finally, you want to optimize over time, right? Security is continuous, threat intelligence is continuous, trust building is continuous. So you want to validate this. And this is really based on both the data insights that we have, as well as the honestly, 50 straight pages of responses that I got in my survey from open unstructured text that I tried to parse through. So when you start, there's no perfect path. It's not perfectly linear. I don't want to say it depends, but we have a lot of suggestions here, and it really does depend on who you are, what your organization needs, and what resources you have available. But you want to start within the skills you have. Who are your old coworkers, your old team members, your old boss? Where does your organization already sponsor or send people to events? Because those are the paths of least resistance that you can start with. See and understand where the gaps in your organization or in your knowledge base or your consumption is that you can start to fill in with these types of relationships. And really start at an hour a week. So this is a patience game. You don't want to say, oh, I'm so inspired by this talk, let me go and connect with everyone. And then in 10 days, you get really busy and then you stop. It's not going to happen like that, and you will be disappointed. It's really more committing to a little bit of time on a regular basis, and you have to be a little bit experimental and extremely patient because you don't know exactly what channels and what methods will end up helping you in the long term. I think based on the DR incident as well, there's a mention that, through another organization, they were able to get some information to help be a little bit more proactive and respond. And so you don't know when it's going to happen, but having more of this infrastructure in place will help. And you'll have basically more eyes than exists in your siloed organization and more resources, more human resources working together. And so there's some examples here, and these are just ideas of if there's a new event, don't discount that. Sometimes new events are fantastic because it's a more scrappy group that's more open and looking to build out opportunities for involvement. And that might be a great place. B-sides are also great. CFP Time tracks a ton of events. Ask questions. If you feel like a newbie and you're like, well, I don't know how to, I don't have fancy fingers and I can't reverse engineer malware yet, or I'm not tracking a specific threat group, I'm just not there. If you meaningfully are able to ask questions and stimulate discussion, or if you understand, fraud, or if you can translate to a different language of interest, if you're great at visualization, if you're the CISO whisperer, you can use that to your advantage. And then finally, Lillian asked me, please don't take this out. It's don't be a beep. Really hold yourself to really high standards, be trustworthy. Not everyone is great, but everyone here is, fantastic. A lot of people are friendly. Don't pretend you know something you don't. And it's a really small community. And if you tarnish that reputation, it is very difficult to get that back. Trust takes time and it's very easy to destroy. Once you've found some success, and everybody here is at an event, so maybe you have some familiarity, you feel stretched too thin. You're stretched too thin already. But really, you want to hone in on what has outsized value. Think critically, and really once you get to this point of I don't have time to do all these things that I'm invited to, you want to really commit to just around 3 channels. If you do more, that's fine, but really that's all you need, the ones that are the best. And by best, I mean you're getting meaningful data, you're talking to people kind of at your level of maturity where it's helping you, it's actually giving you results. They're able to see things, or they're able to provide feedback that helps validate some findings that you have or give perspective. And then another piece that's really important is, by not spending your time here, that's great, but you can pass on introductions. Now you know multiple people, and not everyone is an extrovert and hyper-friendly, but you might have old coworkers or team members or direct reports that may benefit where it might not be valuable to you. And so feel free to delegate and really minimize time that might be low quality for you and for everyone, or low quality just to you that someone else can benefit from. And we're really focused here on quality and not quantity. And so there's a couple quotes here saying, limit the effort you exert with people where you're sharing and you're not getting good stuff back. Either it's noisy, it's just whatever's on abuse.ch, or it's outdated, or they're not sharing at all. You don't have to, you want to fill the gaps in your organization, your needs, you don't have to solve for everyone else's. And then somebody else made a really great point of like, it's a fire hose. If your organization expects you to be a 24/7 feed of data, that is wrong. But you might get alerted through a Discord channel on something that's important. And it's important to also have that communication, have that understanding with your team that this can be part of your responsibility. They need to acknowledge this as well and build that into the structure of your role. So basically make sure that you're able to structure it so you're not stretching yourselves too thin, that the expectations are reasonable. And then finally, continuously iterate to maximize results. You want to build workflows that fit within what you're already doing, include attributions, because it's important to validate not just to yourself that what you're doing is worth it, but there's a lot of skeptical stakeholders, or as I think Sierra's talk said, people who care, that see you as a liability. They don't understand the risk. There are risks involved. They haven't decided whether or not they're going to accept or mitigate that risk. And you need to think about it from that perspective of saying, here are results, and I can show that to you. And then finally, you will change, your role will change, and the company changes too. So be able to understand how these investments are at play so that you can adapt as the situation adapts. And some people right here, like, bro, most of what I know started with a discussion with others. That's amazing. That's really useful. And maybe your team should know that so they give you the buy-in for more or figure out the right structures for more. And so I'm not going to read through the details. I have many, many, many more quotes, but this is not just an aspirational, oh, doesn't that sound nice thing. I asked, what are some interesting results that you got through CTI efforts? People said, I was able to be just in time and save hundreds of thousands of dollars of fees and lost productivity, right? That the business cares about that. You're able to better support clients. The business cares about that. The CTI and the cybersecurity network cares when you're able to actually contribute to an indictment or take down threat infrastructure. And so, there's a lot of success stories here that can give you just ideas about what the results you might be able to expect are, as well as where and how you might be interacting more effectively, more inclusively, and more strategically as well. So I do have the link to the report. Feel free to connect with me. I will be reading and answering questions in the Slack as well. And if you are looking for anything else as well, feel free to just hit me up on LinkedIn. Thank you.
So we've got a couple of questions.
Oh, no.
The first one's a little personal.
Oh, no.
What is your favorite board game?
Oh, I know this. My husband's going to groan. Spirit Island is my favorite board game. And it flips the whole idea of settling everything and creating civilizations on its head because you act as a spirit and it's very thematic. So each character you play is very different and you're kicking them off the island.
Interesting. I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, I'll teach you.
Okay. We got a game night coming. Okay, I love it. I'm going to combine two questions that we actually got in our channel. And the question is just going to be, how did Gen AI affect the results? Do you think it changed like the desire for people to get raw intelligence? Did it change how people ordered things? What are your thoughts there?
So I didn't focus too much on AI in any capacity here, because I think that while data fidelity and structuring, the use of AI is really important. I think the inherent issues and opportunities of just connecting for the sake of learning what's happening in the landscape and the sake of maybe even learning methods to utilize AI effectively are still in that very human to human space. So I'll have to think about it and get back to you more deeply if there were opportunities that came to cross mine in the research.
Okay, awesome.
Mhm.
Are there any questions in the room? I'm looking to see over there.
Whoa, that's very long. I'm curious as to what the sample size of the study was and whether you've calculated for for statistical uncertainty?
Yeah, so I dug into this about 2 years ago too, where like in the report itself, it says, this is not statistically significant. The budget for this report is a resounding $0. So this year we had about 90 respondents. It was heavy on the for-profit in-house organization side and heavy in the like cybersecurity vendors and services side as well. So, the way that we say this in the report is that it is not statistically significant, but it is, directional, and the changes over time are just that first stab of putting some numbers to this very nebulous and kind of intuitive feelings of what's happening in the space. Good question though. Yeah.
Another question back there.
Question is, all right, you did this 2 years ago. What's next? What do you have in mind for the next iteration of the research?
Yeah.
No pressure.
No pressure. Yeah. Last time when I wrote it, I was like, I want to do this, I want to have that, and I want to do all these things. And I was like, okay, do I even have the energy to get one more of these out the door to find out what's changed? So this year we were more successful in getting better international representation, but I really would love to be able to get enough data, as the previous question or commenter had, like, of getting bigger data sets so that we can dig deeper into segmentation about, like, we got a lot of questions like vendors versus in-house, like how is that different? They're very, very different. We just didn't have enough numbers to draw meaningful insights there.
Awesome. Anything else in the room? All right, I got one more.
Okay.
Do you have any insights on how people working in government might look to connect with people working in the public / vendor space? I think they mean private /
So are there ideas of how government can interact within just commercial or private or non-government spaces? This is an area that has gotten a ton of research and engagement since the last survey. And there's actually, I'm aware of active research happening right now about this engagement. I myself am not super expert on the government side of things. However, there were some reports that came out from the Office of the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, I would like to say. And they actually talk about some of these issues in some of these reports and why the private industry is hesitant to share. So I think that the government is making an attempt. I would lean towards my network and ask around the most effective ways to get our opinions and our preferences heard.
All right, last call for questions. All right, I'm gonna do one last one, and it's
Okay.
because I am literally wearing a KC7 shirt, which is what are good volunteer opportunities that are CTI focused? And KC7 is one of them. And if you don't know what KC7 is, one of our fellow advisory board members who could not be here today, and another person from their board, Erica, Katie and I are huge supporters as well. KC7 is a nonprofit organization that teaches people how to do cyber threat intelligence for free. Check it out, kccyber.com, I believe is the website.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll leave with that one. Yeah, everybody volunteer there.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll turn it over to Rebecca or Rick or Katie.